Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are today. This is my second LinkedIn Live of the day. I usually do one, and I'm double privileged today to have had a couple of great conversations, and now having Barry with us. Barry, how are you? Welcome to this conversation, this interview.
I'm great. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for connecting. The first thing that I will ask you to do is please sort of introduce yourself in the chat. People want to, you're going to find a lot of people from all over the world that you're going to find very interesting, and maybe you want to network with them and know more about them. The reason why I do this on LinkedIn Live is because I want to provide a place for you to be one click away from connecting with others. So literally, if you see some comment that you are curious about, you click on that name, you go to that profile, and if it's somebody whom you may be interested in partnering with or collaborating with or just talking about anything, you are another click away from connecting with them. So 2 clicks away from building community here. And so please introduce yourself, let us know where you're connecting from, maybe a couple of things about you, and then we're going to have a very lively and interesting conversation. Barry, I'm going to start by saying this. I only know that I know nothing. Everybody has heard that quote, right? It seems that we were talking offline about how we are in this cyclical process of always going back to things that were said before. You and I were talking about the concept of unlearning and relearning, and this is something that goes back, hundreds of years before our time. But we talk about them today as if they were like the new wave thing, like the new thing in the world. Why is it that we always got to go back to those classics, to the same things that seem to be repeated over and over and over time?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. When I was researching to write on Learn, I was looking through the annals of history to see where these ideas or notions had come from. And I went back over 2,000 years ago to the seed of a civilization, a startup, if you will, in Central Europe. And that startup went on to seed and scale itself to become one of the greatest civilizations we ever know. Now, at the peak of its power, the Roman Empire accounted for roughly 20% of the world's population. It covered over 2 million square miles. And there's so many hypotheses about what allowed Rome or that civilization to sort of scale and sustain itself for over 500 years. And when I ask people that question, the natural reaction is, well, what comes to your mind? What made Rome successful? What do you think comes into your mind naturally?
Me, myself?
Yeah.
I think it's, they were picking up ideas from all over the place and applying them to their own reality.
Well, this is sort of it, right? Like people will often say roads, or they'll say aqueducts, or their systems, like their governance, their armies, and all of those are true. But the unique aspect to the Romans was, as soon as they conquered cultures, when they found practices that were better than their own, they let go of those existing practices and incorporated these new practices from the cultures they essentially attacked into their systems of operation and improved them. So they had built this system to naturally both learn and unlearn. And as a result, it allowed them to continually scale their culture over time. So to me, that was sort of fascinating, right? Like you say, these ideas are not new. They've sort of existed for years, but yet we seem to unlearn them from time to time. Like things seem to happen that we get complacent, or we get used to things being good, things being comfortable. And again, these are the sort of moments where, we have to be aware. Like the world is going to continuously change. We're only going to experience more and more exponential change, if anything, in the years ahead. So really, as individuals, we've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We've got to embrace uncertainty. And we really need a system to recognize both when to learn new skills and when to unlearn our existing skills, so we can get continuous breakthroughs in our performance.
That is fantastic. And before knowing you, about a couple of years ago, I wrote an article, and I was encouraging people to be radically open-minded. And this is why I said that. Being open-minded when the ideas that you're getting are aligned with what you believe is very easy, right? Because you don't have to break up your mental systems. Now, being radically open-minded means what the Romans did. It is, we believe in this, but this civilization, this culture is doing it better. So we got to shatter what we thought was best, and we got to embrace this new thing, even when it contradicts what we had originally believed. What do you think about that idea of being radically open-minded, especially now when we are needing way more creativity to solve these very, very complex challenges that we're going through, not just coronavirus-wise, but climate change, political gridlock, globalization and whatnot. So what does it come to your, what do you get in mind when we talk about being radically open-minded?
Well, I think it comes down to so many parts. The things that always shine for me is our assumptions. Like a lot of our assumptions are founded based on the environment that we're in, what we've been exposed to, things that we've seen, what our parents told us were correct, what our manager's role model was the right way to do things. And this becomes our conditioning. So when you're in a bubble and you only understand, the way a manager works is it tells its employees what to do, that's what you learn. And all the lessons we learn are not great lessons. But yet, if we don't expose ourselves to different environments, different situations, put ourselves a little bit outside our comfort zone, we never experiencing anything different. Therefore, we've no knowledge or information that runs contrary to our existing mental models. And so it's very easy then to become comfortable and almost fear change because we're creating this small universe for ourselves.
Yeah.
So as the Romans essentially expanded their horizons around the globe, as individuals, when you get on a plane and go on holiday to a different country and expose yourself to a different culture, when you try a different type of food that you've never experienced before, right? All of these things are new experiences that give us new information that often can run contrary to our existing mental models of the world. So if anything, like these ideas of being radically open-minded, of actively putting yourself in uncomfortable situations to grow, to challenge your thinking, to validate or invalidate some of your assumptions about how the world works are so important. Because we're going to see new technology changes have impact. We're going to see only more pandemics happen. We're such a connected society now. Like we're a networked global community. When something gets into that network, good and bad, it can have positive effects or negative effects. So I think we have to be aware that we're only going to experience a higher velocity and frequency of change, and therefore as individuals, we need to build this muscle to continuously adapt to changing circumstances. And I think this is what the System of Unlearn is really about, is helping people recognize where is their existing mental models, their skills, their mindset limiting their performance, and they need to essentially relearn new skills to get the breakthroughs that they need.
Absolutely. And we're going to get deeper into that question. But before, I want to share with you, I don't know if you've seen this data. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was research in the US indicating that children between the ages, I think it was 3 and 5, they would ask in that amount of time an average of 40,000 questions, and most of them were like, why this, why that, when, whatever. Once they learned how to read, there was a sharply decrease in the amount of questions that they were asking, because they were being filled with existing knowledge and ideas instead of promoting their curiosity, their imagination, their creativity, their learning and relearning, sort of natural, human approach, right? And I think in times like what we're living in today, we're paying the price of that, because very often organizations inhibit people from being creative. They shape them, to force them into the box. And now when you need them to unleash all that creative power, you come across this reality where, they don't have that muscle, trained, like you said before, or even if they do in their outside life of work, maybe they have a little bit of fear to do that in work, because they may be punished for something that goes wrong, right? So how do you balance this sometimes competing values of letting people learn and learn, being creative, using their imagination, with the idea of organizations always striving for, a little bit more stability.
Yeah, they're great examples. Even as you share that, a couple of more come to mind. I think the most popular TED Talk of all time is Ken Livingstone talking about how kids will take a risk, how
Yes.
they'll try things, how they'll risk being wrong in school, and how so much of our society, as you say, is designed to control that control our curiosity out of the system.
Yeah.
One of my other favorite examples is there's a famous challenge called the Marshmallow Challenge.
I love it.
Right, where you give people some spaghetti, tape, and try and put a marshmallow and see who can construct, the tallest structure. And invariably, we've had MBAs do this, CEOs do it, and invariably the teams that always do the best are a cross-functional group of kids.
Yeah.
Because they're rapidly just experimenting with structures where, these CEOs are trying to get it perfect from the start. And I think there's a lesson there. It's like when we focus on perfection, we actually then become afraid to be wrong. We become afraid to try rather than striving for excellence, iterating and finding what works rapidly. Now, you can have control as you experiment. If anything, what we see is the highest performing organizations in the world have both speed and safety when they experiment. The reason companies like Amazon power ahead is that they can do software deployments every second. They can test hypotheses they have. They've made it economically very cheap to experiment with their customers about what works and what doesn't. They can learn and unlearn in real time with massive accuracy in a controlled way. Because if they take a step forward and it's not the way they want to go, they can reverse it. So the way I describe this is really that strategy is thinking big. We need to think big, be bold, break free of our existing assumptions. But the way you start to go after thinking big is not building big, it's actually starting small.
Mm-hmm.
Trying these small little steps to see what works for you and what doesn't. And small steps create fast feedback loops. They make you feel successful that you've started. But most importantly, they make it safe to fail.
Yeah.
So if you do take a step in the wrong direction, you can learn fast what works for you or what doesn't. So that gives this control, allows for curiosity and experimentation. And I think for so much, people feel like it's a trade-off. It's an and and what we're really saying is you can have both. You can have speed and safety. You can have curiosity and control. You can experiment and find these things out. And again, I think the organizations who've adopted that are the most valuable in the world. And the people who embrace that, I think, get the most out of the world.
And I love that, this principle of quick iterations, very much relying on agility and, going very small and iterating on those small processes and changing stuff as you need to change them. And one person that I truly admire and embodies that is Elon Musk. This guy, literally, he gets feedback at Twitter. Hey, Elon, the power charger station is having this trouble, and in like a couple of hours the problem is resolved because they built their system in a modular way where they can quickly go to the small piece without having to break up the entire thing. They go to the small piece and they fix it pretty quickly based on that feedback. And by the way, as we're having this call, today is April the 8th, Zoom, which now has like 200 million people using Zoom every week, which is insane. They have been getting a lot of backlash because of security issues. Literally, in like 2 or 3 days, now if you go to Zoom, they added a security feature at the bottom of your panel of control in Zoom. And from there, you can quickly lock a meeting, avoid people from sharing the screen. So they iterated and very quickly listened to feedback and implemented something. So pretty interesting. So Barry, but I want to ask you something that I'm very curious about. Two things, actually. It's a two-part question. How does one unlearn something? And what do you think we should unlearn as we go through this crisis?
So I think the first place to start is like, how do I know I need to unlearn? So there's a series of questions that I ask people to help them sort of diagnose themselves about areas that they are not living up to the expectations they have for themselves, and potentially their existing behavior is not working and they need to unlearn.
Mhm.
So the questions I'd ask you and the listeners is, where is a situation where you're not living up to the expectations you have for yourself? Maybe you're not achieving some of the outcomes that you're aiming for. Maybe you've tried everything you can think of and you're still not getting the breakthrough you want, a situation you could be avoiding. Sometimes it's your secret sauce and then it just suddenly just stops working,
Hmm.
right? What comes into your mind when I say those things, like not living up to your expectations, not getting the outcomes you want, situation you're avoiding, struggling with, or maybe you've tried everything you can think of and you're not getting a breakthrough? Anything pop into mind for you?
For me, it is. It's funny. It's a very mundane example, but our newsletter, right? It was very successful at the beginning, but now it all looks the same, and people are like, "Oh, this is the same thing over and over again." And I know I have to do it differently. I just need to unlearn the way I have always done it and do it differently now.
Right. So
It's
this is a
mundane.
great,
It's a mundane example, but it's like very tactical, right?
very, very tactical, right? Because, maybe you've hit a local maximum there. Like maybe the things that worked for you in the past are no longer working,
Mm.
right? So we may need to unlearn and relearn. I try different ways. And often, like when you ask people these questions, I imagine everyone can share in the notes as well. You're probably coming up with challenges very easily to recognize where you're not getting the outcomes that you want. And that's a feedback mechanism, right? It's telling us that our existing behavior is not working. It's not driving the outcomes that we want. Therefore, we need to change our behavior if we want to try and achieve the outcome. And the way I often would say this to companies when I'm working with them is, just like products have features and you've got to continuously innovate your features of your product for it to stay relevant in its market, humans have behavior. So we've got to continuously innovate our behavior to stay relevant in our market. And, while the things that made your newsletter successful in the beginning, they may not be the things that make it successful in the future, right? And just like the behaviors that made me successful as a contributor in a team might not be the behaviors that make me successful as managing a team or managing teams of teams. So I think it's recognizing these sort of inflection points, and if you don't have a system in place to help you recognize what's the outcome you're actually aiming for. So what is success? Is it growing your newsletter by 100% month on month? Is it for me, is it like devolving more decisions down to my team to be made? Right? Like whatever those behaviors are, I've got to get clear on what then the outcome is. Once I understand what my problems are, then I actually need to shift from being in a problem space to actually thinking about, if I solve that problem really well, what will be happening? You need to sort of vision, and I call that like writing a story of success.
Yeah.
So again, like, just if you were to write your one page story of success for solving your newsletter problem, like what would be happening in 2 years' time that's different from today? And think about what you'd be doing differently, your customers would be doing differently. What kind of things pop into your mind?
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
You're putting me on the spot. No,
Oh,
that's all right. No, well, I think the way they consume content is not just. I think part of what's going on here is an overload of information, which of course, is impacting everybody that is sending out newsletters now, because everybody's doing some newsletter, and at the same time, there's a little bit of people seeking for things that they can consume pretty quickly. So maybe they don't want to watch a 60-hour conference like I did a month ago. They want to consume 2-minute videos over a 6 months period of time, and that brings them the entire content, but in bite-sized kind of snippets, right? And I think I'm not doing that, and I know that I have to do it.
right. So
Thank you for making me think about that.
right. Well, again, what you're describing here is like, my customers would be watching more of my content. They might be watching smaller pieces, but more frequently, right? Like I'd have higher utility of the content that I send out there, right? So you're sort of describing these behaviors. right? Like if I was managing a team, I'd be like, my team are making more decisions. I'm focusing on saying what success is and not how. The team are coming back to me with how. This learned helplessness that you sort of spoke about it before, right? Where people are afraid to change, right? I'd be saying like 100% of my team demonstrate no learned helplessness, right? Like I'd be setting this sort of outcome like that. Like what would it take if everything was working really well with my decision making? My teams would be making decisions for themselves. They'd maybe just be coming back to me with the results or where they need my input rather than asking me what the problem is to make the decision every time. They'd be making more of them.
I want to. Oh, I just wanted to dig a little deeper into. I know we have a second part of the question, but I want to dig a little deeper into this idea of fear to change, because in my empirical observations, and I think most people probably have seen something along the same lines, we find that the inability for people to change is not that they don't have the infrastructure or the systems in place, is their own selves, is their own fear to change, because they like you said before, they have to get out of their comfort zone, meaning that they will have to learn new skills. The things that they really mastered in the past, they may be obsolete at that moment or not that relevant anymore, and they gotta let them go, which is part of the title of your book, to letting go of the things that helped us get to success and learning how to produce extraordinary results. So what's your message for those that part of their mind is like, all right, I know I have to change, and to change I have to unlearn these things and I have to relearn or learn these other new things, but the other part of the brain is like, dude, don't let it go. If you let it go, you'd be losing the value that you have brought to this company, and maybe that person that has been competing with you for the leadership position will get it before you, or you may lose your job. So how do you what's your message in there to balance those two competing sides of the brain, so to speak?
Yeah, the way again I think about this is, yeah, we've got to think big about what we might need to unlearn and what better is. But this idea of starting small is so powerful as you relearn, right? Like most people are afraid to try new things for a host of reasons. Uh, Maybe they've got out of the practice of trying new things, so they have this learned helplessness. Change feels scary, but yet the more you change, the easier change becomes. It is one notion. Maybe you're in an organization where if you don't get a perfect result, you could be fired.
Yeah.
How would you be perceived? Right. So again, that's an organizational structure designed to drive success, but actually inhibits people attempting. So I think all these notions that I talk about of striving for excellence over perfection, right? Trying to find the courage to take small steps, to try and relearn new behaviors. Again, by starting small, this notion of making it safe to fail allows people to try things safely and see what works and what doesn't. But the power of people starting, of feeling successful for starting, I get this question so much from leaders. It's like, how do I get my people to try to experiment? I can't get them to do anything. They're afraid to do anything. And yet, one of the counterintuitive parts is if you optimize for the result rather than the attempt, you'll actually fail. So when people are results orientated, that means they fear not getting perfect results. And yet when you try and experiment, you're not going to always get positive results. Part of the process is having both positive and negative results. That's part of the learning process. So really what I continuously am telling leaders is you need to encourage your teams for the attempt, not the result. Because if you just keep encouraging them for the attempt, eventually they'll get the right result. But along the way, they will have built this muscle, which is about comfortable with change, comfortable with trying things, comfortable like figuring problems out. And the power about that is we're always going to have new problems. There's never just going to be one problem that needs one skill. We're going to have multitudes of problems over time. Yeah. And if you've built the muscle to continuously problem solve in your company versus having someone have one skill that they always get perfect results in, there's no there's no argument about who's going to win this over the long term. It's the people that can adapt to changing circumstances. And again, the way you get people started is it's a big vision. We're thinking big about building that capability, but again, we start super small by just trying one new thing today. Like, what's a small thing you could try today to relearn some new behaviors?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the story of the discovery of the X-rays. That it happened by accident, right? And even when you are trying something, whether small or big, and sometimes success, is success, and sometimes failure brings the possibility of other lines of success that you didn't envision before. I mean, a lot of this, the greatest scientists and innovators in the world, they were looking for something and they ended up finding something else, and that something else made them famous, even more famous than probably what they had originally envisioned.
Absolutely right. And like you say, there's countless examples of this. I think Edison, in terms of his experiments in Menlo Park, right? All he's focused on was the rate of experimentation, like how frequently were they running experiments every day? Because again, and this is another sort of counterintuitive idea, especially in this world of uncertainty that we're in. When we're in highly uncertain situations, the natural reaction is to stop. Is to stop movement, to freeze, to wait to see what happens. And yet counterintuitively, when you're in a highly uncertain situation, what you need to do is actually take action. Because by taking action, you get results. You start to get information to understand or the uncertainty. And yet all of our classic conditioning is high uncertainty, stop. Companies are designed at the first sign of an unknown, a risk, an uncertainty, stop. And yet when you stop, you're stagnating, you're not learning, you're actually falling further behind.
Or missing the opportunity.
Right. And so this is sort of the notion where actually in uncertainty, we need to take action to get results, to get information, to help us make better decisions. And the strategy to control that is by taking small steps. It's not making these huge, big bets. It's small steps that allow us to learn fast what works and what doesn't. And we learn our way out of the problem. And yes, we're going to have mistakes, but if it's small, they're recoverable.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's so many of these counterintuitive, what we've been sort of told for years is actually the opposite. And I think trying to give people the tools and the system so they can cope with that uncertainty and take action and learn their way out of the problem or situation that they're in is key. So many businesses at the moment they need to go to remote work. Yeah. We've never done that before. What do we do? Do we sit there and wait for someone to write 25 best practices for how to run a remote workshop? Right? You can read all these practices, but you're not going to try all 20 of them in one go and get them right or figure out. You still have to learn which ones work for you and which don't. So again, the best thing you can do is just pick one small thing, try it for a day, see how it works. Does it, what works for you, what doesn't, and then try and make it better the next day.
One thing. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Barry. I apologize.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
No, I want to read some of the questions from the audience, but I also wanted to ask you something while I try to catch up with other questions in there. But I wanted to share with you also this experience. I come from Venezuela, and back in school 20 plus years ago, we didn't have the abundance that sometimes I see here in the United States, right? And I am an engineer, and as an engineer, I needed to build things. And sometimes it happens, I go, here you have abundance of of pieces and devices and things to build whatever you want. But back then in Venezuela, we didn't have that. So one thing that we needed to learn was to be very resourceful. Meaning, well, if I need this one piece and I don't have it, I'm going to have to find the other 4 pieces that putting them together would do the one thing that one alone piece would do, by itself, if that makes sense. So I'm thinking, based on what you're saying, is in this very rapid pace of learning that we're going through right now, because we're all in the same, in the boat of perhaps not in the same boat, but on the same river of we're all learning and going through fast currents and whatnot. We're all figuring it out. And now I think the power of being resourceful is really important, because you may not have all the answers, from the onset, but by trying and by combining information, ideas, and whatnot, you can resolve all those things that you may consider obstacles. So let me ask you the question. And then I'm going to read some of the questions in the audience. And everybody, thank you so much for being engaged, so engaged in the conversation. I apologize in advance. I won't be able to read all the questions because there are too many, but I'll try to go over some of them. I do want to ask you, Barry, one thing. We always, people in general, they dream with, like, I want to build, the next Facebook, or, the next LinkedIn, or the next Twitter, or the next big thing. So we always have this, gigantic dreams of grandiosity and whatnot, which makes it really, really hard for us to break down that big vision into smaller pieces. And what happens at the end is that, if we try something for 1 week and we didn't build the next Facebook in 1 week, then we are like, all right, that didn't work. Let me move on to the next thing, right? So it can get really disappointing. So my question to you is, do you have any recommendation for people to envision the big thing, but backtrack to the implementation of the smaller things to get there, like how to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and this is the reason why defining your outcomes are so important. When people talk about new business models and ideas, that business models are essentially a whole load of untested assumptions, right? They're just it's like a model. It's only as good as the assumptions you use and the ones you validate to get there. So when people talk to me about they're trying to create the next Facebook, I try to get them to like describe it as an outcome. So what would be, if your business came to life, what would be the changes in behavior we would see? They might say, I don't know, like 1 million people are like collaborating and sharing or communicating on my platform every week. I'm like, brilliant. Okay, that's something that's actually a way we can sort of get towards that. Right. So in the next week, how could we get to 1% of that? What could be something that could be just like 1% of this idea that you've described, this outcome of 1 million people? What would take to get there? And when people are thinking big, they often try to build big. They go with these huge solutions that require a lot of effort, take time to do, and are slow feedback loops. But when you actually descale your idea and think about what would be 1% of the outcome you're trying to get to, and that you could do that in a week, they actually come up with much more naive solutions that are actually much more resourceful, to your point, right? They stop trying to build this multiple huge application with all these massive features in it. They really zero in on 1 or 2 of the key functions that are really, really important. And often you can build some of these functions very easily, very quickly, often now with no tools. So one of the companies I sit on the board for is called ThoughtForma. It's a no-code platform. You literally like drag and drop features onto a prototype canvas and it launches a real fully secure app in minutes. Like I've built apps in 3 hours and launched them with this tool. It's amazing.
Wow.
So these technologies exist now. And when you think about the biggest companies in the world, they didn't start big. They had big ambitions, but they actually started small. Like the first thing Amazon did was sell books, right? What the first thing Google did is let you search on a page. They're not the companies they are today. They started really, really small. They descaled their idea about like what's 1% of the vision and how could we actually find out what that is. And I think that really helps people zero in on the key function that you want to start with. Start small. And then you scale out as you learn fast what works and build out your bigger vision. Because invariably your big vision is not what you end up creating. It's some sort of derivative of it.
Yeah.
But by starting small, you learn your way into your business model by testing and validating or invalidating your assumptions. So have a big vision, think big, but start small. What's 1% of that big vision you have, and how could you start to create that in a week? You might be amazed at what you can achieve.
I can absolutely see the circle closing here between unlearn and lean enterprise. For everybody who don't know what I'm talking about, these are 2 books that Barry authored. Unlearn. You can show him. Yeah, please. Unlearn and Lean Enterprise. Please feel free to, I'm going to be posting the links, and the new book, Future Shock. When is that coming out, Barry?
Yeah, it's actually just released. So this is a book I just contributed to called Aftershock, which was,
No, Aftershock, yes.
yeah, 50-year anniversary of Alvin Toffler's Future Shock book. And
Fantastic.
you know what inspired me with Toffler is he had this amazing quote where it's the illiterate of the 21st century will be the ones who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that was a real inspiration for me as I was writing Unlearn, because we need this ability to continuously update our operating systems, update the way we operate, think, and believe, and act. And I think people that can do that are the ones that will succeed in the future.
Talking about going back to the classics, huh? All right, we're gonna get into a lightning round of questions here. I got a few questions from the audience, and maybe as fast as we can get through them, so that we can try to get to as many as possible. So one question: what kind of people are good at challenging the ingrained mindset? And maybe I'm going to add one more thing to that question: how do we champion them in the workplace?
Yeah, I think the number one characteristic to cultivate to unlearn is curiosity, and we sort of talked a little bit about this. And the simplest way to understand if you're curious or not is you can imagine if you're working in a team and you give someone who's more junior than you a task to solve, and they start solving it in a different way. What's your natural reaction as to how you would solve it? Right? Yeah, you're laughing, right? Right?
I am remembering a story of a math teacher 20 plus years ago, and I never ever forget about that story. He put a problem in the blackboard back then, with chalk, and he asked for somebody to stand up and resolve it. I went up to the blackboard, I resolved the problem, and he said, "It's wrong. The answer is right, but the process is not what I wanted you to do." And I'm like, "I'm doing the process. The process is still a good process, and the result is what you wanted to achieve. What's wrong?" And he said, "That's not what I wanted you to do." And it's exactly what you're saying.
Right? It's classic, right? Yeah, you're doing it wrong,
Yes.
And I think and again, when we take that approach, we close ourselves down to new information or new methods. One of my favorite examples was I coached with the leadership team at HSBC, and one of the most senior execs in the company, what he does is he sits down with the juniors, like the graduates, as they come into the company each year, and he gives them problems to work on that he's working on, because he wants to see the way that they solve them. And for him, the excitement is the discovery when people do things that he would not do. And he's like, that's great. You learn a new technology, you learn a new skill. And you can imagine the cultural artifact that creates in a company of that size, scale, and somewhat bureaucracy, when you have the most senior people in the company sitting with the most junior people in the company to learn from them. Super powerful cultural message for your organization. So I think curiosity is definitely the top one. We talked a lot about commitment to do things that you're going to struggle with. That means you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And again, the way we do that is we start small. We create safety to succeed. So I think looking for those characteristics of curiosity, commitment who'll stick with something, and are actively putting themselves outside their comfort zone, they're the folks to look for, champion, and elevate in your company, and get behind them. They're the experimenters. They're the ones who are going to try things and solve solutions that maybe have never been solved, or demonstrate and role model the culture we want to create. So look for those people and elevate them.
Absolutely. Another question very close to my heart because of past work experiences. The question is, how can one change behavior to achieve a different outcome if you work within a structure that, of course, is pretty rigid and bureaucratic and sometimes politically driven? So how do you change behaviors to produce a change in such an environment?
Yeah, so I think this is where I really lean on those questions I would share to you. It's like, what's the outcome you're aiming for? Is it you're not collaborating well with somebody, if they're not trying things, if the company culture isn't moving, right? These are big amorphous things. So again, try and descale your problem. Like zero in on maybe there's one person that you have a difficult situation with. Maybe there's someone who is being overly political that's holding the company back. Start small. Have a conversation with them. Try and take them aside. discuss with them about what outcome you're trying to aim for. Maybe you're trying to improve the experimentation in the company. You're trying to improve collaboration in the company. And then, and invite them to give you some advice. Say, look, so I'm trying to improve collaboration in the company. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think I am at collaboration? They might say everyone always scores 7 because they want to be polite, right? So you say, great. And then how could I get half a point better? Is there some suggestions you could have for me about how I could just get half a point better in the next week? And maybe they'll give you a few suggestions. And what I would encourage you to do is pick the one that feels a little uncomfortable. And like, just try it, make it really small, try it for a day. And then go back and check in with that person sort of a week later and say, look, thanks for the tip. I've been trying it for the week. Here's what I've learned. What have you noticed about me? And I guarantee you, when you start role modeling behavior change in yourself, that's actually what's going to inspire other people. It shows evidence that you're committed to doing this. You're role modeling new behavior. That inspires people to take action because they see you're being real about it. You're not just paying lip service to it. So again, starting small, start with yourself, role model new behavior. That will infect your team, and that will inspire your team to infect other teams. And this is how you start to grow this through your organization, this thinking big, but starting small with yourself, and you might be surprised with the results.
Fantastic. Got a couple of questions for you. One of them, if we may go pretty quickly with this one, is growing up in our present culture, a process of dumbing down rather than enlightening up. And I think the question goes along the lines of something that I even said before, which is, we look at Instagram and we see somebody posting, something ridiculous maybe, and that person has 65 million followers. And then we see the people working in the lab, like cranking up stuff and, grinding every day, and they get 10 followers, and people think like, well, I prefer to become an influencer than a scientist, right? So what's your thought about that? You're thinking about that?
So I think, the products that people are building, the psychology about what drives our behavior is becoming more understood. And that is working its way into the products that we are developing and product managers are designing. And I know this because both have I trained in behavior design, but I also coach people about how to use it for, like any skill. People use it for good, people use it for not so good. And there's tons of examples of this, right? Like, we love the shot of satisfaction as quickly as possible. We want the dopamine hit. We want to post an image on Instagram and to get a like because it makes us feel good.
Yeah.
And designers are aware of that human behavior. So, when you look at so many of these products, they've created this loop that you try something, you get positive reinforcement and reward to encourage you to keep doing the behavior. Right? So this is a system, and I think when you're aware of those systems, then you have to start making choices about what systems do I want to spend my attention on. Because again, if you're not in control of where your attention goes, someone will take control of your attention. Mm-hmm. And I think this is why in many ways you have to go against the grain to read the 20-minute article, to go deep on subjects. People want the quick hit, the 3 steps to be a CEO,
become millionaire in 5 minutes.
It's a shallow understanding of very complex, but you can sound, smart in a short period of time. So I think it's, mastery will always take repetition and deliberate practice. And I think what you see is, to truly master subjects, people still take that path, but it's becoming harder and harder to fall into that. The easy path is to fall into the quick hit, short cycle, shallow understanding type approach. So just be aware of it. Yeah. And start to control your attention. Like, where do you want to be spending your time? And again, that's one of the unlearning statements I wrote for me when I was like, 80% of my time I want to feel accomplished at the end of my week. And what I found is when I set that outcome, I started looking at things that helped me feel accomplished and what hindered me. And social media was a classic, right? My phone would beep. I'd find my way onto some platform like Facebook and just like troll down through it for 10 minutes and that's every hour. So in 2016, I deleted Facebook from my phone. I made it really hard to do. So when my phone beeped again and I went looking for Facebook, it wasn't there. So I got that 10 minutes back. That's 10 minutes every hour. That's 6 hours a day. That's actually a work day a week where I actually own that attention and spending it on better things, areas that I want to do, like personal development or working on projects or, spending time with people like yourself, like which I feel more accomplished as a result. So again, we have to start to be aware of these things and own where we want to be and define where we want to be and hold ourselves accountable to that. And I think, again, that's where I've seen this system really pay dividends, both for myself and for people who've taken it up.
That is fantastic. I have one more question and then, we're going to be wrapping up. This has been a fantastic conversation, extremely relevant because of what's happening today and the fact that, I talk to, hundreds of people in HR basically every week because of my work with Hacking HR. And I see with a little bit of preoccupation the fact that we're trying to replicate what we did before coronavirus into the time of coronavirus, right? And replicating means, we're trying to make people work in the same way we were working before, or, replicate behaviors that do not apply anymore. They don't work anymore. And I understand that, we're going through a rapid period of, unlearning, relearning, learning, and that's hard for mostly everybody. So this is an extremely powerful conversation given the circumstances we're going through. So my last question to you is, if you had a magic wand, like to make people change one thing, only one thing, that 1% that you talked about before, that little thing, that half point that you were talking about before, what that one thing be given the circumstances that we're going through today? One small thing.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. This is the one thing I'm doing, right? So I have a journal and I call it a decision-making journal. So every day I'm just like writing down, what are some of the things I did today? What did I spend my time on? What helped me? What hindered me? What held me back? And then every day I have one little experiment that I try. One thing I try to get just a little bit better. Maybe it was something that was a challenge yesterday. Maybe it's something that worked and I'd like to enhance. And at the end of the day, I capture all my notes and I define my one little experiment that I'm going to try tomorrow. And so every day I feel like I'm just getting like 1% better or 1% more in control or learning more about this uncertain situation that we're in. So, 1% every day after 7 days, it's an exponential return about I'm learning how to adapt to this new environment. So again, this power of thinking big about aspirations, about where we want to go or where the future could hold in this new paradigm we're in. But starting small, just one small step every day. I think Warren Buffett always says the most amazing thing in the world is compound interest. It's the most of it. And so it pays off over time. And I'd really encourage people, that sort of decision journal for me has been super powerful. Because, when we're under stress, when there's a lot of change happening, it's hard to remember, what really happened. How did we really feel? What was different? And I think that's been a super powerful little mechanism for me. And I think something most people could start straight away.
That is fantastic. It reminds me a little bit about the book by Grit by, I think it's Angela Duckworth.
Fantastic book. Oh, fantastic.
It is the persistent, incremental small things every day, all days of the year that will get you through, to excellence, and not just trying to do something big the day number one, because you won't be able to do that and you're going to set yourself for failure. It is incremental every day, because we're humans, right? We're not like a machine that can, operate from, 0 to 1 million in 1 second. We got to go at a different pace. So this has been fantastic. Barry, thank you so much for all this amazing information. Everybody, thank you for connecting. Please check out Barry's LinkedIn profile, his website. What is your website, Barry, so that everybody knows?
Yeah, so BarryOReilly.com. I'm pretty much on every platform as Barry O'Reilly, whether it's a Twitter or an Instagram. And yeah, any questions or thoughts as you try this system, just reach out. And I'm always trying to collect on learning stories, what people have tried, what worked, what didn't. So please share them with me. It's always a joy to hear them.
Yeah, and please check out his books, Lean Enterprise, Unlearn, and the new book, Aftershock. Barry, thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation, and I am hoping we can have you back in another interview once we are in a different environment. With living other air or breathing other air in this as we go through this coronavirus situation.
It'll be my absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, and please stay connected. And thank you so much for connecting. Thank you.